Welcome back. Today we are talking about debugging errors in R. And want to hear something ironic? This is the second time I've recorded this video. Why? Because the first time I made a big R error. So here we are again, practicing what I preach. R errors, they are a pain to deal with sometimes. And the biggest reason that they frustrate me as a teacher of students is that there are students who are really savvy and really getting the content, but may not be the best programmers. And unfortunately, it's a totally different skill set to be able to program and to be able to do statistics. But alas, it is what it is. And so in this video, I'm gonna try my best to help you figure out how to debug errors. So let me introduce you to my 5-step strategy that will guarantee, okay, it won't guarantee, that guarantees that you will find every single error in your R code. Okay, that's not true either, but it's at least going to help. So the 5-step strategy is number 1, to actually read the error message. Because it turns out it actually gives you a lot of useful information. Who'd have thought? Number 2, to start with a fresh R session. Because sometimes the error is caused by objects in R's memory that you ended up getting rid of. Number 3, to print out the objects that you are working from. Because very often you are trying to reference an R object that just doesn't exist. And if you just tried to print that, you would say, hey, this doesn't exist. Number 4, simplify your code. Because especially if you have a very long bit of code, the error might be anywhere in there. And so if you just isolate the location where that error is happening, it's a lot easier to figure out what's going on. And number 5, Google it if all else fails, because chances are somebody else has had that problem. And in this video, I'm going to demonstrate all sorts of errors so that you can see how we can debug these things and try to figure out what's going on. So with that, let's go to my R, shall we? We're in R, yay! The first thing I want to talk about is the anatomy of an error message. So most, but not all, error messages follow the same format. They will say error in, and they will give you some information about what it tried to do, sometimes in the background, sometimes in the foreground. And then after the colon, it will tell you what the problem is. The information we need is usually contained after the colon. The stuff that is before the colon, sometimes the error is buried very deep within the code, and it'll say, here's what you tried to run, and it doesn't look familiar. And in that case, yeah, that's why I tend to ignore that and instead focus on this, at least for simple bugs. And this video is for simple errors. I'm not going to address, at least in this video, if you're creating your own functions or your own custom R packages or anything like that. That debugging process is pretty different than what I'm gonna do here. So with that, let's go ahead and start with an example script. I don't know why that's commented, but let's pretend, again, this is a very fresh R session. Let's pretend I just wanted to plot the Ptsd variable from the Avengers dataset. You will see something if you were to try to do the same, which I can include the same script in the description so you can follow along. You will see error in flexplot, could not find function flexplot. And also what I'm gonna do is I'm going to go File, Save As. You can do this if you want. I'm just going to go 7B, R errors, dash, corrected, because I'm going to correct all the errors in this script as I go along. So that is telling me it could not find the function flexplot. So and that's simple enough. It can't find flexplot. I'm asking it to perform the flexplot function and it can't find it. So there are 3 reasons why that might happen. One is that we misspelled the function name. So let's say you're trying to compute the mean and say mean 1 through 2. Might say could not find function mean. Why is that? Well, because capital mean is not a function, lowercase mean is. And so if you misspell a function or if you have the wrong case, like in this case uppercase, then you would have a problem. Another reason is maybe you forgot to load a package. That's exactly what happened here. So if I were to, so I'm gonna move this up here. If I were to require flexplot first, or you could type library flexplot and then run it, that will get rid of the error. And then we get this beautiful plot on the right here. Third reason why why R might tell us a function doesn't exist is if we it's very similar to the first one, but we can't remember the name of the function. So for example, when preparing for these videos a couple days ago, I couldn't remember the function for standard deviation, and I thought it was stdev. And so I tried computing that, and it says could not find function stdev. Why? Because the function for computing the standard deviation is sd, not stdev. So anyway, regardless of the reason, if you see it say could not find function, that just means it can't find the function. So in this example, the way to fix that was to load flexplot first. Second example that I'm going to show you is the argument that says argument is not numeric or logical. So let's say we require flexplot and then create a new data set called D, which is just a copy of the Avengers data set. And then let's say, I'm going to go ahead and uncomment that out. Let's say that when we first opened this data set, we wanted to modify the Ptsd variable. So instead of being on a scale from, I think it's like 1 to 10 or something like that, we instead decided we wanted to break it into low, medium, and high. Normally I wouldn't recommend doing that. It's better to analyze the raw data, but let's pretend that you did that. And cut is a function that basically does that if you're interested. It just takes a numeric variable and translates it into a categorical variable into smaller categories. And then let's pretend that you say, oh, you know what, that's a bad idea. So maybe you comment that code out, but forgot you did that. And so maybe later you want to compute the mean of Ptsd, and you get this error that says, well, it's actually not an error, it's a warning. So difference between a warning and an error says, I'm not even gonna try to do what you're asking me to do. There's too many problems. Whereas a warning, it's more like, well, I can do it, but I don't think the results I'm gonna give you are what you're looking for. And in this case, the mean of the data set is NA. But it follows a similar anatomy that it tells you the function that it tried to do, and then it says, here's what's happening, or here's the problem. Argument is not numeric or logical. And so basically, what that is saying is the variable $Ptsd, it's hoping it's a numeric variable, or at least a logical, like a bunch of trues and falses. But it's not. And so usually that means that it's a string variable. So in that situation, I might just close out of R, which is what I'm gonna do right now, and then open a new R session and then run it from the beginning and see if that problem comes up again. So here I am back into R, and if I were to basically highlight from there all the way down to there, it's going to run that, loading flexplot, and then it's going to compute the mean. And I can't count the number of times this has happened where I've gotten an error like that and I just said, all right, I'm just gonna run from the beginning. Oftentimes running from the beginning fixes the problem, because before I had created an object that really messed up my original object, and just by starting with a clean slate, everything is fixed. So take home lesson 1 is to try running your script from the beginning, and also, as I've said in a previous video, write the scripts as if you are always going to run them from the beginning. And the other take home message here is that if it says argument is not numeric or logical, that probably means you're trying to do something like compute a mean or a sum or a standard deviation on something that is a string instead of a numeric vector. All right, let's look at another example. So object not found, or object does not exist. So let's say we are going to require flexplot and then D equals Avengers. And then let's say, I'm not gonna run this code right now for reasons that you'll see in a minute, but let's say at one time I decided I was gonna create a new data set called D2, which is just the first 5 column of Avengers. And then maybe later I decided that I wasn't gonna do that. And then I just removed that code. But later, maybe under the old version, after I created D2, all of my functions were referencing D2. And so if I were to try to run that, it would say object D2 not found. And so again, it's not able to find the D2 object. And I'll say, all right, well, maybe I'll just run this from the beginning. And by the way, my shortcut, I love shortcuts. I think this will work on a PC, but on a Mac, if I hit Shift Command and then the up arrow, it will select everything before that. And then so if I ran that again, I still get the same problem. Okay, so that didn't fix things. And so maybe we'll move on to step 3, I think it is, that we'll just print out the objects that we're dealing with. So in this case, I'm trying to print the object Ptsd within the object D2. And so maybe I will just print D2 $Ptsd, and it says object D2 not found. Now you could go one step further and just print out D2, and in either case it's saying I can't find the object. I'll say, oh yeah, I totally commented that out. And so now that I've erased it, I need to go back and change all these D2s to a D. And then now that should work. And sure enough, it does work. Yay, hallelujah. So take home message here. If running the script from the beginning doesn't work, try printing the objects. And also the other take home message here is if it says object not found, that just means it can't find the object. Who'd have thought? So let's move on to another example. This example is actually pretty complicated. In the last video, I showed you the basics of FlexPlot, but you could get pretty complex with FlexPlot. So let's say we try to run this error code, or this FlexPlot code right here. We're going to get a message that says unexpected, close parentheses, in, and then it gives the code that we tried to run. Now, just as a little information, this is actually kind of informative. It's saying that I found a closed parentheses that I wasn't expecting, and then it shows you exactly where it found it. So it has 3 closed parentheses in a row, and it wasn't expecting one of those. And also it gives you a little more hints right here. And so we can try to directly debug that, but I'm going to illustrate the 4th strategy. I think it's the 4th. And that is to basically simplify your code. So this, we have included a lot of arguments. So maybe what I'm gonna do is I'm going to try just deleting this last part. And that's what this line is right here. So I tried deleting the part that says labels equals list whatever. So if I try to run that, does that fix it? No. Okay, so that tells me that the error probably is not here, but somewhere before that. And so maybe this time I'm going to delete breaks equals income equals that. And so now if I run that, now you have to pay close attention here. Before it says unexpected close parentheses, now it's saying unexpected symbol. And so something has changed. So we can be confident that there was probably a problem here. But even after deleting that, we have a new error message. So again, I'm going to do the same thing I did before, and I'm going to keep deleting, and maybe I'll just say, hey, I know that if I just run this part, and if there are no errors, that it should run correctly. And so now if I run that, it's still saying what it was saying before, unexpected symbol in. And so what is the problem here? Now we might look at this more closely since we have a lot less that we have to look through. It'll say unexpected symbol in, FlexPlot, weight loss, weight.loss, tilde motivation. Uh-oh. I forgot. You can't just string variables together like that. You either have to have a plus or you have to have a vertical pipe. So I'll say, that was the problem. I got to put the vertical pipe in there. And so now I've identified that one error, and actually I'm going to start here. So if I put that back in, now if I put that back in and run it, we now have a different error. And we have a much longer error message. Why is that? Because I wrote this error message. You can always recognize error messages from me because A, they're longer, B, they are more informative, and C, they are hilarious. And so what does this say? Error in whatever. Ruh-oh, somebody done made a mistake. Looks like you either spelled something wrong or included a variable not in your data set. Have you considered spell check? Oh, by the way, it was the variables weight loss, motivation, income, and health. So basically flexplot is telling me that I can't find any of the variables that you mentioned. So maybe what I will do is go back to step 2 of my error debugging strategy, where I look at the objects themselves. So if I go $$ weight loss, it says null, or null is another way of saying that doesn't exist. So I might say, what is going on here? And then I might look at D instead. So you can do head D, or you can do strd. And then if I look at D, I see I got IQ, agility, speed, strength, damage. Holy, wait a minute! That's the wrong data set. So here I was trying to plot the variables weight loss, motivation, income, and health, which is in the exercise data set. But D is actually the Avengers data set. Ah, silly me. I was referencing the wrong data set. So now, if I were to modify that, I'll make a note. Oops, wrong data set. And so now if I were to say exercise underscore data, now hopefully we'll get something to run. And look at that, we do. So notice we went through like 3 different errors before we finally got something to run. And we did. So that's good. So now we might start adding back the other layers that we had before. And so maybe I will take this line of code and see if I can add that back in. And I just made an error, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it again. Oh no, I didn't make an error. Oh, so I put 2 commas next to each other. I thought R would have a problem with that, but apparently it doesn't. Okay, so I ran that. I'll go ahead and put that on 2 lines so y'all can see it. So I ran that and everything works. Awesome. But I still wanted to put those labels in there. So I'm gonna go down here and add another line of what I had. So I'll go comma and I'll put this on a new line. And then now I know that had a problem before, so I suspect this is going to have a problem. Okay, and it does. But now I know that the problem isn't anywhere up here. The problem has to be down here. And then now I can read this error message more closely. Unexpected equal in. And then so it looks like so it tells you exactly where it had the problem. So breaks equals income equals. And if you're familiar with how flexplot is written, you might recognize the error. And if you're not, that's okay. But I do know that there should be list there. So I should say list, and because I added an open parentheses, now I have to add a close parentheses. And then now I'm hoping that works. And sure enough, it works. It's now given me a note, which isn't a problem. That's from me. It says, you didn't specify a reference for the ghost line, which means I get to choose it. That shows a lot of trust. I appreciate that. I won't let you down. Again, sarcastic comments are from me. So anyway, so that is working. So that's good. So we got our income breaks. So income is breaking at the right place. And now let's go ahead and try to add the final section, which is the labels. I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to go after that parentheses and then paste that there. And then now, oops. Why did that? Okay, so now I'm having a new problem and it's actually telling me where it is. And so here's another strategy that you can use. So it looks like I'm still having a parentheses error. So one thing you can do is go to the very last parentheses, hit enter, and then put it on the same line as your open parentheses. So I know that those are a pair. And then now it'll be easier to see where that's coming from. And I see the problem. I've got C, open parentheses and close parentheses, but I got list, open parentheses, but no close parentheses. And so now if I close that parentheses and then hit save, now that red X is gone. So now if I run it, no errors, we get our plot. Finally. So that was an extensive and elaborate error that we had not only the wrong data set that we were using, but we forgot to put list for our breaks, and we had floating close parentheses that didn't match anything. But hopefully this illustrates the idea that you just break it down into small chunks so you can identify exactly where the problem is. And once you know where the problem is, then it's easier to think about what the problem is. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and this is what I would recommend you do, is just delete all the debugging that you did. And so again, the idea is that we have a fresh data set. In fact, I'm going to do that with these two. And so, yeah. So now I've got a clean R script that is ready to run from the beginning. In fact, I'm going to, well, I guess that's okay there. So yeah, now we've got things working, and these are notes that I had written to myself earlier that I don't need anymore. So I'm gonna delete those. So now that it works, let's talk about our take-home message. So a couple take-home messages from this long example is to break the code down into smaller pieces. Get the small pieces functioning, add larger pieces, get those functioning, and then eventually you'll be able to get the whole thing working. And also the other take-home message is unexpected something can mean that you forgot to close parentheses, that you forgot a plus or a vertical pipe sign, you forgot to close a quote. That can happen sometimes too. Anyway, and the basic strategy for dealing with those is, again, to break the code down into smaller chunks. All right, so now we're going to go to another example, and this is when you get something that says cannot open the connection or no such file or directory. So in the link in the description, I have included a CSV data set for Hogwarts. So this is a data set that has like scores for a bunch of students on each of their classes and whether they survived the final battle at Hogwarts. And so if I ran that, I get error, cannot open the connection. It actually gives two error, well, it gives an error message and a warning. So it says cannot open the connection. So it's trying to connect to a file called hogwarts.csv and it can't open that connection. And then it has a warning message as well that says no such file or directory. So it can't find a file called hogwarts.csv. Now there are three reasons that I can think of that might happen. Number one is that we are not in our project folder. And like I've said repeatedly, I highly recommend working in projects. That helps to keep things organized, but it also makes it a lot easier to read in data sets. And if you're getting an error like this, it may mean that you're not within a project. So for example, if you wanted to, well, I'll go ahead and open up my files right here and I'll just go to my root project folder. Basically, when you read in a file from an R project, it will look within your project folder. And so what it's trying to do is it's trying to say read.csv Hogwarts. So it's looking for a file called hogwarts.csv. And if you look in my root folder, it can't find it. So that would be one reason, is because you're not in your project folder. Now in this example, I am in my project folder. And so you might say, well, maybe I misspelled it. So it's hogwarts.csv. Well, of course, there's nothing here. And so I didn't misspell it. And so it's actually the third problem. We're not pointing to the right folder. So my Hogwarts data set is actually in my data folder right here. And so what I need to do is say read.csv data /hogwarts.csv instead of just hogwarts.csv. And so I'm going to, I'll go ahead and leave the reasons up there and then correct it. So reasons, yeah, so we got that. And now once we do that, it works. And then we can read, just do head Hogwarts just to see what it's looking like. So yeah, take home message there. If it says cannot open the connection, that means it just can't open the file. It's the file that you're trying to read in, it can't find. So you just need to figure out why that is. Are you in the right folder, or did you misspell the CSV name, and that sort of thing. So another example is when you might get something that says undefined columns selected. So let's pretend that you want to create a total score that is the sum of potions, history, and herbology. And so this is the code that I might run to, I know I've never introduced you to row sums, but basically if you were to just sum those columns, it would sum up the rows and the columns. If you just want the sums across the rows, so each person has a total score, then you would use row sums. Now there are better ways to do that, and I'll show you that in a future video, but this is one way you can do that. So Hogwarts $total, and now it says error in whatever. Oops, you know what I did here? This is actually a different error. It says Hogwarts scores not found. And notice that I named my data set Hogwarts, and I'm trying to read in Hogwarts _ scores. So that was an unintentional error, but I'm gonna fix it right now. So now if I do that, it gives me a different error. It says error in whatever, undefined columns selected. So what does that mean? So let's go ahead and start. Step 1, read the error message, undefined columns selected. So that probably means that I'm trying to select a column in the Hogwarts data set that isn't there. So now I'm gonna move on to step 2 and start looking at the individual objects. So, you know, I've got all this complex code, but I'm just gonna start with this portion and see if I can run that. And no, I get the same error. So now I'm going to delete herbology and run that. And hey, that worked. And so there is something about herbology that is wrong. And if you look close enough, it's herbalgy. I forgot an O. And so if I run that, then it works. And now I can go back here and put my O back in. And then now I get my total score. So yay. So the take-home message here is that undefined columns probably means that you misspelled a column. I'm hoping that helps you make sense a little bit more of the error messages and how to approach going about fixing those error messages. So with that, let's review our learning objectives. Number 1, know what the anatomy of an error message is. Again, you've got 2 components. You've got error in, and then it shows you what it tried to run. Usually not as informative, and then colon, and then the problem that it had. And that's where it's gonna describe the problem to you. That's where you're gonna be able to find some information. Number 2, the 5 steps to debugging. And again, step 1 is to read the error message. Step 2 is to start with a fresh R script in a new session. Step 3 is to print the objects that you are working with. Step 4 is to simplify the function. And step 5, which I didn't show as a last resort, is to Google it. Third learning objective. Know what all of these error messages mean. Could not find function. Argument is not numeric or logical. Object not found. Undefined column selected. Cannot open the connection. And that missing close parentheses one. So hopefully that helps. We'll see you next time. Peace out.